In the previous lesson, we covered some of the wireless standards. In this lesson, we will go over a few examples on how to crack WEP and WPA. But before we go into the demonstrations, let me first define what are these actually protocols, right? So the first one is WEP or WEP, and WEP stands for Wired Equivalency Protocol. And it is a protocol that you should definitely avoid. It is full of vulnerabilities and it is extremely easy to crack nowadays, right? And we will actually go over a demonstration on how easy it is to crack this protocol in just a few minutes. Now, WEP uses a weak and reusable initialization vector, or an IV. That's what we use to crack the wireless infrastructure password in our example in a few minutes, right? I'm including here a representation of the initialization vector of WEP for your reference, right? Now, how this actually helps us, right? So the thing about WEP is like, what if actually we know the contents of a packet, right? And you can actually predict what the contents of the packet is by using things like ARP. Using ARP packets, you can definitely predict what the contents of a packet is, because ARP packets are always 68 bytes long, right? And Wi-Fi ARP packets have a 40-byte RCA4 or RC4 rather, encrypted part, right? So the first 15 bytes are always this representation, so AA03, and you can read the rest. And then it also has XORs, and it also XOR these bytes with the XOR cipher text to recover, and then the first 15 bytes of plain text, right? So definitely if you can collect enough ARP packets with different initialization vectors or different IVs, then you can actually find the key through statistical analysis, right? And statistical attacks, right? Now, WPA is a little bit more secure than WEP, but you can also crack its password. For WPA, and especially WPA1, using TKIP, it is actually fairly easy to crack the password, and we will see that in a few minutes as well, because I'm actually going to do a demonstration of that, right? Now, another protocol that is also fairly unsecure is WPS, right? It's also easy to brute force, and also it has actually a short pin that only takes a few hours to actually, of course, brute force or crack. And it all depends on your CPU or GPU. So, of course, if you use GPUs, you will obtain much better results than if you just use a CPU. So depending on how the capacity that you actually have and the environment that you have, whether you're using CPUs or GPUs or in some cases ASICs to actually do the password cracking, that's how long it's actually going to take you to do this. But again, even with modern standard base computers nowadays, it will actually only take a few hours. And the difference between WEP and WPS and WPA is the way that you actually do the steps to actually crack the password, right? And we will go over this in a few minutes. Now, again, if you actually use pre-shared keys, that means that basically dictionary attacks will be possible, right? So you can actually brute force your way in by using dictionary attacks. And again, you're gonna see this in a few minutes. Now, in WPA, each user receives a unique session key, and this is actually done to prevent decryption from a packet capture, right? So if you actually recover and then the PSK or the pre-shared key, then of course this makes it a little bit difficult. However, if you capture all 4 handshakes of the initial WPA negotiation, then you can actually obtain the WPA pre-shared key, and that's how we're actually going to see it in our demo using the AirCrackNG toolset, right? So now that I have actually given you an introduction of these protocols, let's actually go over how to crack them, right? So for this example, this is the topology that I'm using, right? You have a wireless router in the corporate network that is configured with the SSID called CorpNet, right? So corp-net. And then the wireless network for this example that is configured via DHCP is in the 192.168.1.0 network with a 24-bit mask. Now that router is actually connected to a firewall, and then that firewall is connected to an internet router, and then of course to the internet, right? So this is a very simplistic topology. In a real world enterprise, you may actually have numerous access points controlled by a wireless LAN controller or by a cloud service like a Meraki, for example. However, in essence, the procedure that I'm actually going to explain here, it doesn't matter. The environment, if you're actually using WEP or WPA, this topology will be more than enough. And also, by the way, in this topology, I'm also showing our Kali attack laptop, here. So let's go over how to crack WEP, right? So the first thing is that I want to cover is a tool that is fairly cool to monitor all the available SSIDs in the air, right? And that tool is Kismet, right? Now, Kismet, as we went in previous lessons, this tool is actually not only used for, of course, penetration testing, but it's actually used by many people to actually do troubleshooting as well, right? Now, as you can actually clearly see here, the CorpNet SSID is actually running WEP, right? You can also see a graph of packets going over the air and information about the actual router itself, right? You can do similar things with a series of tools part of the Aircrack NG framework. Some people refer this as a tool, but it's actually a tool set, right? And you learn about these tools in previous lessons, right? But let's actually see it in action, right? So let's see how you can use it to crack WEP. First, just like Kismet, you can use AeroDump, which is one of the tools included in this tool set, to monitor and then view all SSIDs available near you, right? So in this case, I'm actually using the AeroDump ng command and specifying WLAN 0, which is actually my interface. And in this example, I'm actually using a laptop with an alpha external adapter. And you learn, about these adapters in previous lessons as well, right? So now, as you can see here, you can view all the available wireless SSIDs near you. And there you go. You can see that actually CorpNet is, of course, present and is actually using WEP, right? So you want to remember a few things. The SSID, of course, right? The corp-net. And then also the BSSID hex number that I'm highlighting here. And the channel number. And in this case, the channel is channel 11, right? Now that you have that information, let's actually launch the AeroDump again, but only to collect packets for that BSSID and for that channel specifically, so for channel 11 specifically. So we're actually capturing all packets in for channel 11, and then we're also entering the hex number for the BSSID and specifying our wireless interface, which in this case is WLAN 0. Then we use Aircrack NG to actually crack the WEP pre-share key. And now this is a command you actually need, aircrack ng -a, and the -a specifies, -a1 rather, specifies that we're actually cracking WEP, right? And you specify the target BSSID and the capture file that we actually associated before, right? So the one that we actually created before. And in this case, I capture, this a few times. So that's why you see the 04 at the end of the file name. Then you need anywhere between 20,000 to 60,000 initialization vectors to actually crack the web password, for any router, right? Now, you can also use Air Replay to actually spoof an associated station and then replay the ARP frames. And you do this actually to increase the data rate, right? So if you want to be faster and collect more initialization vectors, then you can use the Air Replay to spoof an associated station, and then of course replay the ARP frames and increase the data rate. So this is actually what I'm doing here, specifying the target BSSID, the spoof station MAC address, and also the interface that we're actually using. So once you launch Aircrack, and depending on how many initialization vectors you actually have, you will then see the WEP key. And there you go. That's the WEP key for that wireless router and the CorpNet SSID, right? So this is actually how you crack, in a few steps, a WEP key. So you can see it's actually fairly insecure protocol that you should avoid and very easy to crack. Now let's go over how to crack WPA, right? So in this case, you see that now I'm actually running the CorpNet using WPA pre-share key or PSK, right? Now, we use the error dump NG, just like we did before, to capture a WPA handshake corresponding to a target network. So again, we wait until the WPA handshake appears in the top line here. And then, of course, this is the command that I'm actually using, error dump ng, and then we write that to a file fairly similar to what we did for WEP, right? So we specify the channel, we specify the BSSID and the interface. Now, if you do not see a handshake, you can also use error replay to de-authenticate, so basically to kick out an associated, client or station, and this will force a handshake to occur. And then, of course, you actually can get that handshake to use errorcrack-ng to find the WPA pre-share key using a dictionary, right? Now, in my example here, the dictionary name that I'm actually using is called words, right? So that's the actual file name. And then depending on your compute power, again, so whether you use GPUs or you can use CPUs, right? You can make it either faster or slower, of course, depending on your environment, right? So it can take either minutes or hours, right? Depending on your environment. Now, in this example, I actually cheated a little bit, right? Because I don't want to wait hours for it to actually associate all the different words and different phrases and everything. So I actually put the pre-share key within the first 1,000 lines. But as you can see here, there you can see the WPA key for the CorpNet, and it only took, not even a second, right? Now, there's another tool that automates this process definitely in seconds, right? So instead of actually you remembering all these commands and doing all the capture files and everything, it actually automates everything for you. And the tool is actually called Fern. And you can see here, it actually uses the AirCrack underlying framework as well. And it completely automates, all the steps that we followed a moment ago, right? So once you launch the attack, you can see that it actually uses a dictionary. And in this case, of course, we're using the same dictionary that we used before. And then that it finds the key of the WPA SSID CorpNet. And again, you can actually automate this and brute force more than one SSID, right? So in here, I'm just concentrating and only scoping that SSID. And you can actually automate every single SSID that actually sees, right? Now, there's also a commercial version of this tool that has additional features. So, there you go. I mean, that's how you actually crack WEP and WPA keys in just a few steps, right? Again, some of these tools can be fairly simple and fast, depending on your processing power or depending on your compute power. But, any type of computer, so in your laptop, you can actually launch these tools and have fun cracking WPA and WEP passwords.